7 years of marriage, that woman wouldn't stop pestering him. Albert, do you think your wife is cuter than me? He sneered coldly, you think you're worthy to be compared to her? Later, I saw him spoil that woman without restraint. He carried her high heels for her, set off fireworks, and spent New Year's Eve with her. Meanwhile, he grew increasingly distant toward me. On her birthday, I was rear-ended by one of his enemies and crashed into the guardrail. He rushed to the scene, only to find the divorce papers I left him. Even when you're sick, he doesn't come to keep you company? In the crowded hospital, I was hooked up to N4, sitting in a corner. My best friend, having just paid the bill, sat next to me, venting her frustration. The pain from my period cramps had gotten worse over the years. The doctor told me that because of my past miscarriages, I'm no longer fit to get pregnant. I sighed and opened my phone, thinking of calling Albert. As expected, the line was busy. Is he busy with work again? My best friend grumbled, his wife's like this, and he's still working. I forced a smile. The face staring back at me in the mirror was pale and lifeless. Do you remember Maggie? Maggie? You mean the one who chased after Albert for 7 years, never caught him, and kept getting scolded by him? Yeah. Well, she caught him now. Maggie didn't just chase him for 7 years, she's also Albert's secretary. A minute ago, Maggie posted on Instagram. The flowers don't need to bloom anymore. The person I've been waiting for has arrived. The picture was of 2 hands entwined. In a 5-star hotel. Rose petals scattered across the floor, a discarded evening gown, and a bespoke men's tie. There was a pale line on the man's long ring finger. The mark left by a wedding ring. The last picture was of a familiar leather seat. And 2 black silk stockings. Many people envied me, thinking I'd chosen the right person when I was young. They believed that after Albert became successful, he gave me his undivided attention. But the truth is, Albert had been unfaithful. By the time I left the hospital, it was nearly dusk. I received a call from Albert. What's wrong? His voice was as always, calm, composed, but filled with tenderness. It was different from the way he spoke to others. I tossed the medical report into my bag, nothing. I won't be home tonight, Albert said. But today is my birthday. I realized then, we've known each other for 20 years. He had celebrated my birthday for 19 years. But this year, he forgot. I suddenly felt like crying. Albert, today's my birthday. Could you come see me now? I could hear rustling sounds, the friction of fabric on the other end. After a moment, he said, okay. He came in person, driving. After all these years, Albert had grown more restrained, with a quiet grace in his every move, making it impossible to look away. I sat in the passenger seat. The car was spotless. There was no trace of anyone else. I glanced at him. His neat collar, his exorbitantly priced watch, his meticulously tied tie. And the wedding ring. Images of him tangled with Maggie flashed uncontrollably in my mind. Clothes disheveled, lost in passion. A suffocating feeling overwhelmed me. What's wrong? You don't look well. He always handled things with precision, never leaving any clues behind. If I hadn't stumbled upon Maggie's private Instagram account by accident, I would never have found any evidence. I clenched the seatbelt. The doctor said it'll be hard for us to have kids in the future. It's fine. I care about you, Albert said absent-mindedly, staring ahead, lost in thought. In the early days of his startup, I suffered with him through a lot. I never recovered my health and had several miscarriages in a row. None survived. In the process, I ruined my body. I knew deep down he wanted a child. Suddenly, his phone rang. The sharp ringtone shattered the silence. Pick it up for me, he said. I glanced at the screen and froze. Maggie. Answer it, Albert's tone remained calm. I put it on speaker. Hello, he's driving. Maggie on the other end seemed surprised to hear me. After a brief pause, her voice sounded low. Selena, can you give the phone to Albert? It's on speaker. You can talk. Maggie's voice was thick with emotion, as though she'd been crying. Albert, I'd like to take tomorrow off. For what? Albert's voice was cold. I'm feeling down. I want to go to the amusement park with my boyfriend tomorrow. Boyfriend. I instinctively glanced at Albert's tightly pressed lips. It was like someone had hit me with a heavy blow. Was she inviting him? Or was this her way of retaliating for taking Albert away from her today? Maggie, I pay you to work, not to take days off every other day. I'm sorry, but I really want to go. Her voice cracked as she started sobbing. He left me today. I just need to clear my head. I stared hard at Albert, as if hoping to hear him refuse. Albert's lips were pressed tight, his finger tapping lightly on the steering wheel. This better not happen again. Maggie giggled through her tears. Thank you, Albert. After hanging up, Albert stared blankly ahead. His fingers tapped the steering wheel slower and slower. It was a sign he was relaxing. He was bothered by having left Maggie behind. Now, he was relieved after comforting her. Maybe he didn't even want to admit it. Accepting Maggie's invitation, right under my nose, gave him a thrill. Let's go, too, I suddenly suggested. Albert rejected it without a second thought. I have a meeting tomorrow. Amusement parks are too childish. Not for you. You wouldn't have said that before, I murmured. Without looking up, Albert said, Selena, we've been married for 7 years. 7 years. Was he saying I shouldn't expect romance anymore? I turned to look out the window, not arguing further. Albert had probably forgotten that we used to be childish too. When we were 18, during the hottest summer. He held an umbrella for me, his shoulders weighed down with my snacks and my shoulder bag, while we went crazy in the amusement park all day. At the highest point on the Ferris wheel, he kissed me. And said, Selena, I'm going to marry you. Back then, his eyes were filled with only me. We were the golden couple, envied by all our classmates. When we got married, we even invited our high school teachers. One of them said, I knew that boy liked you back then. Sure enough, he chased you right after graduation. Years later, when the company went public, Albert finally admitted he'd been planning it all along. To this day, I still can't figure out if love is worth risking your life for. In our 5th year of marriage, Maggie became Albert's secretary. I walked into his office and caught her whining to him, Albert, do you think your wife is cuter than me? Albert had coldly retorted, you think you're worthy to be compared to her? I gradually let my guard down. 2 more years passed, and I almost forgot about her. Then, by chance, I found Maggie's private Instagram. And that's when the nightmare began. The world she showed on Instagram was completely different from what Albert had told me. The man who claimed to hate Maggie would lower himself to carry her high heels as they strolled on a beach in the Maldives. He would block my calls on New Year's Eve. So he could watch the first firework bloom in the night sky with her when the clock struck midnight. In the end, he couldn't even remember my birthday. Maybe love really is something that anyone can replace. After dinner, Albert went out to the balcony to make a call. The birthday cake he had hastily bought sat untouched on the table. I watched him, the soft glow from his phone illuminating his profile, his eyes filled with tenderness. The same tenderness Albert used to have when he looked at me when we were young. I didn't say anything. I quietly cleared the dishes. The next day, I went to the amusement park alone. It had been years since we graduated. The amusement park had been renovated countless times. But the Ferris wheel we rode still looked the same. Albert, could you come with me next time? Maggie wore a white dress, holding onto Albert's arm, looking utterly aggrieved. It was her birthday yesterday, Albert explained calmly. Don't I usually spend all my time with you? You don't love me anymore, so what's the point of celebrating a birthday? Maggie started acting spoiled. I'm so young, throwing myself at an older man like you, and you don't even appreciate it. Albert chuckled. I'm old? How come you never mentioned that in bed? Yes, you're rich, handsome, and full of energy. Happy now? She tugged on Albert as they boarded the Ferris wheel. Miss, are you here with your boyfriend? The ticket seller asked. At the top of the Ferris wheel, you can make a wish. If you start kissing from the bottom all the way to the top, it guarantees a lifetime of happiness together. The ticket seller blocked me from entering. I ignored him. I stared directly at Albert and Maggie as they sat on the Ferris wheel. His hand lazily rested on the metal railing, and he tilted his head, watching as Maggie tried to put on a pair of bunny ear headbands. She fumbled a few times, but couldn't get them on. Finally, he raised his hand, gently pinching Maggie's chin to hold her face steady. With his other hand, he lightly adjusted the headband. The angle leaned slightly back, making it easier for him to kiss her right after. The two of them, entangled in a kiss, gradually blurred as the cabin rose higher. Albert didn't let go, holding her close. The sunlight was glaring. I couldn't stop my tears from falling. But I refused to blink. I watched until the Ferris wheel rose so high that I could no longer see their silhouettes. Suddenly, I lost it and frantically called Albert. At first, he declined the call. I cried as I kept dialing. After several tries, someone finally picked up. It was Maggie. "Selena," she said with a forced politeness, her voice tinged with irritation from being interrupted, "Albert is in a meeting. Is there something you need? Give him the phone. He's not available. Are you deaf? Give him the phone." Maggie fell silent and handed the phone to Albert. His voice came through, slightly hoarse. "Selena, what's going on?" I stared at the Ferris wheel, now at its peak, and softly asked, "How's the view from the top?" There was sudden dead silence on the other end. "Albert, if I hadn't called, were you planning to make a wish with her, to be together forever? Here's the English translation based on your requirements." Maggie wore a white dress, holding onto Albert's arm, looking utterly aggrieved. "It was her birthday yesterday," Albert explained calmly. "Don't I usually spend all my time with you? You don't love me anymore, so what's the point of celebrating a birthday?" Maggie started acting spoiled. "I'm so young, throwing myself at an older man like you, and you don't even appreciate it." Albert chuckled. "I'm old? How come you never mention that in bed?" Yes, you're rich, handsome, and full of energy. Happy now?" She tugged on Albert as they boarded the Ferris wheel. "Miss, are you here with your boyfriend?" the ticket seller asked. "At the top of the Ferris wheel, you can make a wish. If you start kissing from the bottom all the way to the top, it guarantees a lifetime of happiness together." The ticket seller blocked me from entering. I ignored him. I stared directly at Albert and Maggie as they sat on the Ferris wheel. His hand lazily rested on the metal railing, and he tilted his head, watching as Maggie tried to put on a pair of bunny ear headbands. She fumbled a few times, but couldn't get them on. Finally, he raised his hand, gently pinching Maggie's chin to hold her face steady. With his other hand, he lightly adjusted the headband. The angle leaned slightly back, making it easier for him to kiss her right after. The two of them, entangled in a kiss, gradually blurred as the cabin rose higher. Albert didn't let go, holding her close. The sunlight was glaring. I couldn't stop my tears from falling. But I refused to blink. I watched until the Ferris wheel rose so high that I could no longer see their silhouettes. Suddenly, I lost it and frantically called Albert. At first, he declined the call. I cried as I kept dialing. After several tries, someone finally picked up. It was Maggie. "Selena," she said with a forced politeness, her voice tinged with irritation from being interrupted, "Albert is in a meeting. Is there something you need? Give him the phone. He's not available. Are you deaf? Give him the phone." Maggie fell silent and handed the phone to Albert. His voice came through, slightly hoarse. "Selena, what's going on?" I stared at the Ferris wheel, now at its peak, and softly asked, "How's the view from the top?" There was sudden dead silence on the other end. "Albert, if I hadn't called, were you planning to make a wish with her, to be together forever?" In the living room, Albert sat across from me, silent for a long time. "Selena, does it have to be this way?" On the coffee table lay a divorce agreement. I had it drafted in a hurry by a lawyer friend. Albert skimmed through it and said, "It's very rough. There are a lot of contested clauses." I clenched my hands tightly. "Is this all you have to say to me at a time like this?" Albert paused for a moment. "I'm sorry." Tears welled up in my eyes and fell. "No matter how rough the clauses are, could I not keep 90% of the assets? You're the one at fault. Can't I recover the assets you gave to Maggie?" Facing my red, tearful eyes, Albert couldn't say a word. I threw the agreement in his face, furious. Suddenly, I broke down in tears. "Albert, do you even have a heart? What do I mean to you?" A trace of pain flashed in his eyes, and suddenly he embraced me. Selena, I'm sorry. I was confused for a while. Can we not get divorced? I choked out, when you took her to the Maldives, did you know I was sick? Do you know why my period pain gets worse every time? Albert, our last child, we lost it because I drank to protect you. Because you have stomach problems. And what did you do? You drank to protect Maggie. By the end, I was sobbing uncontrollably. Albert held me tightly, gently stroking my hair, to comfort me. I'm sorry, it won't happen again. Selena, I'll fire her, cut her off completely, okay? That night, I threw the biggest tantrum I ever had. I went hysterical. I smashed the house to pieces. Albert didn't say a word. He could only try to comfort me softly. Selena, stop. Your hand's bleeding. My voice was hoarse from crying, and in the end, all I could say to him was, we're getting a divorce. Albert stroked my hair and quietly said, Selena, I'll handle everything. Just wait for me. Albert firmly rejected my request for a divorce. That day, I stood by the window, coldly watching Maggie sobbing pitifully downstairs. You weren't like this before, Albert. You do love me, right? You're wrong, Albert said coldly. I was only interested in you for a while. Now that it's over, isn't that normal? Maggie wiped her tears in a mess. Albert, you liar. You're the biggest liar in the world. As she squatted down to cry, it began to rain. Albert lowered his gaze, lost in thought. Maybe the sudden twitch of his hand, veins bulging as he clenched it, said something. The next day, Maggie disappeared from the company. For some time after that, Albert came home every day, and he started talking more and more. Though I never responded, he didn't seem to care. It almost felt like the early days of our startup. But some things, once broken, can never be put back together. At least, there was one thing I could still hold on to. Money. Over the past few years, Albert's company grew larger and larger. Due to my health, I had stopped working and focused on recovery at home. So, when I decided to return to the company, my friends didn't understand. Selena, are you checking up on Albert by going to his company? I corrected them seriously, it's our company. From the startup to where it is now, I've contributed a lot. And I own a considerable amount of shares. One friend said, you don't know how good you've got it. Albert makes money, you could be traveling the world. Why not let him take you to the Maldives, for a vacation? Come to think of it, he's never taken me anywhere. Yet he gave Maggie all the romance in the world. When Albert found out, he asked me, Selena, do you want to go? Okay. I knew it was just guilt-driven compensation. But I still went. I had consulted a lawyer, and to file for divorce, I needed a lot of evidence. Albert was too cautious, nothing could be found. So I could only go after Maggie. People always show their flaws when they panic. For instance, Albert took me to revisit the places they'd been together. Before we left, Maggie came to see me. Do you really think you've won? Maggie smiled, he can't live without me. Sooner or later, he'll come back to me. You should know, there's no law that governs love. It's not a crime for us to love each other. I didn't want to hear another word. You can ask Albert for a divorce, as long as he agrees. If there's nothing else, we're off on vacation. Maggie didn't get angry, instead, she laughed, have fun, but unfortunately he will definitely come to me halfway. Walking on the beach in the Maldives. The distant light blue sea reflected the golden, dazzling sunlight. It was beautiful. I held up my phone and leisurely arranged a 9-square photo collage to post on Instagram. I knew Maggie would see it. And soon, she would respond with photos of her own. The lawyer said, as soon as she accidentally reveals her identity, we'll have her. After posting the pictures, I noticed Albert staring at the distant sunset, lost in thought. What's wrong? I asked. Albert snapped out of it and smiled slightly, nothing. It's time for dinner. I looked at him for a long time before saying, all right, let's go eat. Not far away, I heard the joyful laugh of a young woman. She was barefoot, running on the sand, calling back to the man behind her, hurry up. We have to catch the sunset. Albert's face showed a fleeting moment of distraction. I quietly looked away and tossed the shell I had been holding. No matter how beautiful the view, it was no longer the first time. His heart had already taken in a more beautiful sight. Albert had a few drinks tonight. I was a little tipsy too, leaning against the soft pillows, gazing at the endless ocean. When Albert leaned in to kiss me, I slightly turned my head away. Albert froze, his voice hoarse. "Selena, what's wrong? Let's just talk tonight." "Okay." Honestly, I lost count of how much I convinced Albert to drink. When people are drunk, it's easy for their true feelings to come out. The lawyer said that if he could write a letter of remorse, it would be even better. Albert kissed my ear. "You've always had a weak body. That time you were sick, I carried you on my back for 2 kilometers to the hospital." I responded calmly, "Yeah. Back then, I felt really lucky to have someone who loved me." "You always will," he said. "Albert will always love Selena." The gentle breeze blew in through the curtains. But it couldn't cover the lies and hypocrisy. I said to him, "Albert, sing me another song." Albert, at 18, had a beautiful voice. He used to sing love songs to me, confidently, in front of the whole school. After gaining status and power, though, he stopped singing. "Which one?" he smiled. "The one you sang when you confessed to me." I got up and sat on the balcony, the soft evening breeze lifting my hair. Closing my eyes, I felt as though I had returned to the summer when Albert confessed to me, back when we were 18. At that time, I firmly believed in our vow to grow old together. The phone on the coffee table lit up. It was a message from Maggie. "I'm pregnant. With Albert's baby. You can't take him from me." I didn't know when the wind stopped. The singing stopped too. The song wasn't even finished. I turned around and saw Albert standing in the dark, gripping his phone. I knew then that some things could never go back to the way they were. He said, "Selena, something came up at the company. I have to go." When I returned from my solo vacation, everyone seemed confused. "Did you and Albert have a fight?" I always smiled gently. "No, we're fine. Albert was treating me better than ever." Only because one day, I cried in front of a group of kindergartners getting out of school. Albert hugged me, his voice full of guilt. "Selena, I'm sorry. I've let you down." I grabbed his tie. "Albert, never do anything to hurt me again. People say I've changed. In front of Albert, I'm like a fragile little bunny. But at work, I'm sharp and capable. You'd never guess I was once a full-time housewife. Only I know how hard it is to grit my teeth under the covers in the dead of night, silently giving myself courage. I'm running out of time. This relationship feels like a frog being boiled in warm water. It's been so long that I've lost the ability to survive in the world. Albert, come with me to the concert tonight." After work, I handed him the tickets. "I waited forever to get these. I really want you to come with me." Albert looked troubled. Today was the day he was supposed to accompany Maggie to her prenatal checkup. I looked disappointed. "Is there something going on? I mean, I can go by myself if needed." "No," Albert interrupted me, "I'll go with you. I actually enjoy concerts a lot." Any concert, really. Otherwise, I wouldn't have fallen for Albert's singing back in the day. The entire evening, I clutched my glow stick, shouting and screaming amidst the crowd. Albert, glued to his phone, sat restlessly beside me. I could tell Maggie was throwing a tantrum. But I didn't care. After the concert, we held hands, walking down a tree-lined path. There were many families around us, mostly parents with their children. I smiled and said, "Albert, when I was 18, I imagined that when we were young, you'd go to concerts with me. And when we're older, you and the kids would go with me. If we had a kid, we'd be just as happy as they are tonight." Albert suddenly squeezed my hand tightly. "Selena." His voice carried too many emotions. I turned around, beaming. "But it's okay. Even though we don't have a child, having you with me is enough." Albert's face went blank, and his eyes gradually reddened. "Selena, I'm sorry. I'm such an idiot." I cupped his face, wiping away his tears. "No, Albert will always be my Albert. Tonight, I'm really happy. Thank you for being with me." I stood on my tiptoes, planting a light kiss on his lips. Stepping back, I smiled and said, "I guess you probably have something to deal with at the company, so I'll just grab a taxi home." Just as I took a few steps, my wrist was suddenly grabbed tightly. He pulled me into a tight embrace. "Albert said, I don't have anything. Let's go home. That night, Albert was a bit wild. He kissed me fervently, tousled my hair. In the heat of the moment, he even said he wanted to have a baby with me. Just as he was about to get serious, I pressed my hand against his belt. Albert, I don't trust you anymore. Could you write me a promise letter? Okay. I got another message from Maggie half a month later. This time, she came to see me in person. Maggie had lost a lot of weight, her words sharp. He doesn't love you anymore, so why are you still clinging to him? I really wonder, do all mistresses attend the same training class? Even their lines are identical. I said, Maggie, Albert and I have known each other for 20 years. 20 years, and he still fell for me. Maggie's tone was mocking. Selena, stop deluding yourself. Do you really think he's cut ties with me? She was shaking with anger, pulling out her tablet to show me some intimate photos. Weren't you proud of yourself? Thought you'd won your husband back. Look. These were taken yesterday, him in bed with me. 3 hours. Can he do that if he doesn't love me? Yesterday. I remembered. Albert had told me, I've got a client dinner tonight. Might not make it back. Want to come along? When the pain reaches a certain level, it just numbs you. I'm not stupid. The first time a man loses his fidelity, he's tainted. There's no second chance at trust. I stared at her belly and asked, how's the baby? Healthy. I looked at her intently, my tone calm. I'm not giving Albert back to you. Maggie seemed to find that amusing. You don't seriously think you still have some sort of charm, do you? I'll throw him away. If you want to pick up trash, be my guest. I couldn't help but let out a trace of mockery. Maggie was furious. Before she could throw that glass of water at me, I smoothly picked up my bag and left the cafe. I had all the evidence I needed. I could file for divorce anytime. However, if Albert felt guilty enough, a negotiated divorce could maximize my benefits. I grabbed my bag, ignored her livid expression, and walked out of the cafe. Albert arranged for me to see several OB/GYN specialists. All were top professors from prestigious hospitals. He went out of his way to help me take care of my health. I acted very cooperative. Once, during a particularly bad period cramp, I was in so much pain that I broke out in a sweat. Albert saw it. Later, he stood by the window, smoking one cigarette after another, his face blank. He said, I'm sorry, Selena. I didn't know you suffered this much before. I smiled and shook my head, it's okay. As long as I have your love, that's enough. In truth, watching Albert struggle like this stirred up complex emotions in me. I wonder what 18-year-old Albert would think, seeing himself like this now. He took me shopping a few times. I stood in front of a store window, looking at the limited edition shoes he had bought for Maggie, and said regretfully, I really wanted a pair of those, too. In the reflection of the glass, I saw Albert's face darken. He knew they were sold out. There would never be another chance to buy them. He had given the last pair to Maggie as a birthday gift. Let's look at something else. He pulled me along, walking ahead. I said, Albert, I quite like their ad slogan. Some gifts can only be given once. You gave yourself to me, so you won't give yourself to anyone else, right? Albert's voice was hoarse, there won't be anyone else. In his eyes, I was no longer lifeless. I was becoming more and more vibrant. Albert often stared at me, lost in thought. What are you looking at? Nothing, just thinking of how you looked when you were young. Albert's eyes were full of tenderness. Selena, I love you. At that moment, I was sitting on the couch, cross-legged, holding my laptop. Then tell me, how should I do this part? You little dummy, it's simple. Albert put his arm around me and started helping me solve my work problem. Just like back in the day, when he would lean on his hand, lying beside the desk, helping me solve math problems. That evening, when Albert and I were leaving work, we were stopped by Maggie, who was heavily pregnant, at the door. Her eyes were red as she said, Albert, are you going to abandon me and the baby? Albert's face darkened as he grabbed my hand. What nonsense are you talking about? I'm not lying. She gritted her teeth, there's your child inside me, are you going to deny it? Albert tried to pull me upstairs. I shook his hand off and smiled faintly, you handle this. I'll go home on my own. Albert's face froze. Selena. I ignored him and went upstairs. In fact, I had already installed a surveillance camera in the garage last time to monitor our parking space. Now, on the screen, I watched Albert holding Maggie in his arms. Quietly, I hit the record button. I thought you didn't want me anymore. I won't. Albert sighed, but she's still my wife. Then get a divorce. Maggie said. Albert gently stroked her face. Go home, be good. When will you come see me? Soon. When Albert came home, I was leaning against the soft pillow, discussing a project with a colleague. Selena, he called out to me. I quietly looked into his eyes, not speaking for a long time. Albert hesitated. Maggie, her boyfriend ran off. She's not doing well mentally. I responded with a sound and smiled. Oh, so that's what happened. I hope she's okay. I'd heard enough of his stupid, damned lies. They weren't even as entertaining as a live comedy show. Albert walked over and handed me a cup of jasmine milk tea from downstairs. It's still warm, your favorite. I'm not drinking it. I closed my laptop. I quit a long time ago. Selena, you don't believe me? No, I smiled. We're in love, so whatever you say, I believe. Albert wanted to say something, but nothing came out. Albert, do you have any regrets? I asked. Without blinking, he replied, yes. I regret getting involved with Maggie. I have regrets too. I regret getting involved with him. Work was at its busiest phase. I was often so swamped I couldn't even take a sip of water. On Christmas Day, snow began to fall outside. Albert was away on a business trip. I was driving home when I got a call from him, reminding me, make sure you eat properly while I'm gone. Wait for me to come back. I know. At a busy intersection, a large truck came out of nowhere, crashed through the median, and barreled straight toward me. I instinctively turned the steering wheel. The car slammed into the guardrail. The airbags deployed. The loud crash caused a ringing in my ears. For a moment, I didn't even realize I had been in an accident. In the background, Albert's voice was urgently shouting on the phone. Later, the doctors arrived and lifted me onto a stretcher. Looking at the snow-covered world outside, I suddenly remembered it was Maggie's birthday today. At that moment, I made up my mind. I left Albert a divorce agreement and walked away for good. I trust he'll understand my meaning, either sign it, or I'll take him to court. A month after Selena disappeared, Albert had gone mad, harassing all her friends and family. As a result, the news of his 3-year affair with Maggie became common knowledge. People sighed, desire is deadly. With money and power, people chase thrills. In the end, they lose even their former selves. Albert tore up the divorce agreement Selena left behind and barely held on for a month. In January, Albert received a new divorce agreement from Selena, sent from overseas. The terms were much more thorough. It was clear she had hired a professional legal team. She was determined to end things with him. Albert left a crying Maggie behind and went abroad. He found his biological parents, with whom he had a distant relationship. After hearing his story, they said, "You betrayed your marriage, so we support her decision." Walking down the streets of a foreign country, Albert saw an elderly couple with gray hair, supporting each other as they sat on a park bench, watching the sunset. Albert suddenly crouched down and wept uncontrollably. It was only then that he realized what he had lost. He had loved Selena for 20 years. Selena was like the protective soil around the roots of a plant. With her there, he could grow freely, flourish, and seek out brighter sunlight. Once she was gone, Albert realized the deep, piercing pain from his roots. It was a sign of rot. Without Selena, Albert was left with nothing. "Did you have a fight with your wife?" The elderly couple kindly asked Albert, seeing his state. Choking back tears, Albert said, "Yes, I made a terrible mistake." "Then apologize, and ask for her forgiveness." Albert's heart skipped a beat, as if he saw a glimmer of hope. But in the next second, the elderly man smiled kindly and added, "If she still loves you, you might succeed." The hope in Albert's heart instantly shattered. He sank even deeper into despair. Yes, how could Selena still love him? In all those countless nights of self-deception, while he was holding Maggie, lost in pleasure, he had already shattered her heart. How could anyone love someone who has hurt them so deeply? Albert returned to his home country after hearing that Maggie was about to give birth. By now, he only felt disgust. He had once said that Maggie was not even close to being compared to Selena. And it was still true. Maggie wasn't as capable at work as Selena, she wasn't as beautiful, and she didn't have Selena's figure. The only thing she had going for her was being eager and passionate in bed. Now, that had turned into something cheap. Maggie yelled at him, "When you loved me, you didn't say that. You don't even love Selena, but you still treat her so well. Why can't you do the same for me?" Albert just scoffed. "I've loved her for 20 years. And you? What do you have, besides hundreds of photos in bed?" It was then that Maggie realized, even after getting Albert through such means, it didn't count as a victory. In fact, in this game, there were no winners. "I will never marry you." Albert made it clear, "Once the child is born, I will take responsibility." Maggie cried and screamed for a long time, only for Albert to slam the door and leave in frustration. I woke up after the car accident and stayed in the hospital for a long time. After months of recovery, my lawyer flew in to see me in December. I handed him the evidence, "Thanks for all your hard work these past few weeks." The lawyer smiled, "You're one of the few clients I've had who remained mentally strong throughout. Most wives break down during the evidence collection phase." I thought for a moment, then said, "If we manage to get back the shares and assets he gave Maggie, I'll have." "You'll have a lot of influence in the company," the lawyer finished for me. "Good. Thank you." On the day I was discharged from the hospital, I went to our old high school. It was on this very stage that Albert confessed to me during our graduation ceremony. The school still had our old, yellowing photo on the wall. I found a janitor and asked him to take it down. "Want to keep it as a memento?" I shook my head, "No, we're getting divorced." The janitor sighed regretfully, "After all these years? Every graduating class comes here to confess, because of you too." "I can't believe it." "Yeah, I can't believe it either," I sighed, staring at the two smiling teenagers in the photo. 18-year-old Albert and Selena would be heartbroken to see us now. As I was leaving the school, I ran into Albert. He was standing there, looking much thinner than I remembered. "Selena." I looked up, "What a coincidence. Are you here to pick up old photos too?" "Yeah." I lowered my head, took a deep breath, and suddenly let out a soft laugh. "Albert, why bother?" "Selena, I'm not going to marry Maggie. I'll get custody of the child, and we won't get divorced, okay? Didn't you always want a child?" I looked at him and asked softly, "Albert, how did you end up like this?" He grabbed my shoulders, squeezing tightly, his eyes red. "Please, Selena, just give me another chance, okay? I once swore I'd be good to you for the rest of my life." Albert broke down in tears. "I was foolish. I made a lot of mistakes, but I swear it won't happen again." I watched him for a moment before saying, "Can you stop crying? You're not like you used to be, and I don't like you like this." Albert hurriedly wiped away his tears. "Selena, tell me what you want. As long as I can do it, I will. I want you to set off fireworks with me." "Okay." Albert's face lit up, but then he froze. He remembered what I had said to him when we graduated. I had told him, "Albert, when we're rich, you'll set off the most expensive fireworks with me." But he had already done that with Maggie. It's not about the fireworks or their cost. What I wanted was the youth that's now gone forever. Our past, Albert can never give back to me. Albert sobbed, "Selena, you won't forgive me." I squeezed his hand. "It's the 18-year-old Albert who can't forgive you. Let's end it here. Let's part on good terms." Albert didn't say a word as I walked away. He knew there was no forgiving what he had done. I divorced Albert. The assets were split as I had requested, with me getting 90%. Albert didn't agree, but left with nothing voluntarily. I didn't sit idly by these past few months. I gritted my teeth and forced myself to adapt to the corporate world. So when I returned to the company, I was more than capable of handling everything. The month Maggie was about to give birth, the lawsuit against her went to court. I sued to reclaim our marital assets. This was the second batch of evidence I had gathered, including her conversations with Albert, her social media posts showing off luxury homes and cars, and the share transfer documents. All of this happened during my marriage, and with the divorce agreement between Albert and me, the evidence was undeniable. The court ruled in my favor, ordering everything to be returned. I still remember it was a sunny day when Maggie, heavily pregnant, threw a tantrum in public. "The baby in my belly is Albert's." "I know," I replied calmly, glancing at my watch. My afternoon meeting wasn't urgent, so I had time to talk. Maggie said, "You don't even have a child, so what right do you have to keep Albert's assets? Shouldn't the money go to the child?" "It should," I nodded. "But you don't get to decide that." Albert had no money left after the divorce. No matter how much she wanted, Albert had nothing to give her. Maggie ended up living the life she feared the most. Albert lost all motivation for work and fell into a deep depression. Every word I said to him before the divorce, every place I took him, had planted seeds in his heart that were now growing. Betrayers should face the consequences. Honestly, I didn't care if she had Albert's child. I only cared about how much money I could get. Fighting out of pride is the most useless thing. "Selena, look at yourself. Albert could never love you like this." I looked at my reflection in the car window. It was true. I wasn't young anymore. There was no more longing for love in my eyes. But what the hardships had shaped wasn't weariness. It was the courage to keep going. I smiled and asked her, "Is love that important?" "Maybe it is. Two people starting from nothing, weathering storms together, supporting each other, and eventually reaching success, it might be love that gets them through. But in the end, it's just that." Epilogue. Maggie didn't take good care of their child. The poor little one passed away at just 2 years old due to illness. Maggie fell into depression, torturing Albert day after day. A friend asked Selena discreetly, "Are you going to the funeral?" She replied, "No." Her career was flourishing now, she didn't have time to worry about others. "I heard Albert started a small company, but it's not doing well." "Yeah." Selena didn't even look up. "After all, he has to raise a child." "I heard that as soon as the child passed away, Albert shut down the company." "You really were his spirit," the friend remarked. "Back when you were around, he was full of ambition. Now look at him." The phone rang suddenly, and Selena quickly answered it. A man's voice came through the receiver. "I'll pick you up for dinner tonight?" "Sure." Seeing the smile on Selena's face, her friend asked, "Got something going on?" "Yeah, business partner." "Is that all?" "He's been pursuing me." Her friend teased, "You'll have to introduce him to us sometime." That evening, as Selena was walking out, she saw a familiar car parked by the roadside. It was Albert's. She had given him the car in the divorce. He stepped out as she approached. "Selena." Just as her friend had said, the vitality had drained from him. The once confident Albert was now just a shadow of his former self, weighed down by gloom. Selena nodded, "My condolences." It was a polite, emotionless statement. Albert sighed and looked up at the brightly lit building. He had once stood here with everything. Now, it was all gone. "I never thought it would end up like this." "Like what?" Selena asked calmly, "Just a simple betrayal, no big deal, right?" Albert choked up, "I'm sorry." "Betrayal is betrayal," she said. "You betrayed me, and now you paid the price. That's enough." Selena's matter-of-fact tone unsettled him. It wasn't how he expected them to end. "Selena, when did I know you were cheating?" Selena smiled, finishing his question for him. "A long time ago. I saw it on her social media." Albert opened his mouth to say something, but Selena cut him off. "I know what you want to ask. If we could ever get back together." "No, that was a lie." "That you still love me, also a lie. Even the intimacy between us wasn't genuine." Albert's face turned pale, drained of all color. "Selena, why?" "Because I needed evidence," Selena said, curling her lips in a mocking smile. "If you didn't feel guilty toward me, how else was I going to gather proof? How else would you willingly give up the assets and leave with nothing?" She wasn't that magnanimous. Those who hurt her should all pay a price. He was, and so was Maggie. That unfamiliar expression on Albert's face made his heart ache. "But you're crying." Selena laughed, "Just because I'm upset, does it mean I can't fight for my share?" "Albert, I still need to live." From a distance, a tall man stepped out of a car. He was dressed in a sharp suit, with a trace of weariness from traveling. "Selena." He called out to her, his face showing some signs of fatigue. Albert suddenly had a sinking feeling in his chest. Selena naturally took the man's arm. "Albert, let me introduce you. This is my boyfriend, Louis." Louis nodded. "Nice to meet you." It took Albert a while to find his voice. You have a boyfriend?" "Yes." There was no explanation, and she had no intention of giving one. Just a simple word, brushing off his question. Louis held Selena's hand. "Finished talking? Let's go grab something to eat." "Yeah, we're done." The moment Selena turned around, Albert felt a sudden wave of panic. "Selena." She glanced back, and her eyes landed on the bouquet of blooming red roses in the backseat of his car. She understood why he had come today. To be honest, even Albert wasn't sure what he was hoping for. Maybe he wanted her to know what he had in mind. He nervously stared at Selena, waiting for some kind of response. But to his surprise, she simply turned back around, calmly smiled at Louis, and said, "Buy me a bouquet of roses, okay? The most expensive ones." "I already did." "They're in the car." The two of them slowly walked away, chatting about something cheerful, laughing together. Albert stood there, staring at their shadows. At first, his and Selena's shadows overlapped slightly. Short, but a perfect match. It reminded him of how they looked when they were younger. As Selena walked further, their shadows grew longer. And at some point, they completely separated. The shadow beneath his feet was Albert at 18. The shadow ahead, hand in hand with another, was Selena at 30. And as for him, he was forever lost in the chaos of being 28. Unable to ever move forward.